Welcome to Athens Politics Nerd. This time we're taking a look at the District 2 Commission race between Melissa Link and Jason Jacobs. District 2 includes the Boulevard area, the neighborhoods between Baxter and Broad, and the 1st through 4th Street side of East Athens. Let's get into it, starting with Incumbent Commissioner Melissa Link. Thanks so much for doing this with me, Melissa.
Thank you.
So you're running for your 3rd full term as ACC Commissioner. In your last 2 elections, you won with 63% and 70% of the vote. And you've had 71% of the vote. And you've had a lot of support in this district. And you've been involved in the crafting of a number of important pieces of legislation over the years. So looking back on your last 2.5 terms, what most stands out to you? What are you most proud of having accomplished?
Well, you know, I ran because I saw our community changing. Real estate profiteers were coming in, housing prices were going up, the cultural diversity of our neighborhoods was changing. And I feel like, you know, that cultural diversity was what made Athens special. So some of the things I'm most proud of is taking some small steps to preserve that. You know, I worked really hard to save the McBurney house and a couple other houses on Reese Street from the Varsity redevelopment. And now that is, you know, permanent affordable housing. It's 4 apartments run by the Athens Land Trust. I worked really hard to save the Murmur Trestle. You know, when I got into office, the plans were to dismantle it completely and replace it with what would probably be a modern steel bridge. I insisted on a public input process for that, and people came out in droves and advocated for the beautiful bridge we have now, which does incorporate much of the original design. You know, I advocated for the West Downtown Historic District because, you know, in a blink of an eye, you know, the rest of downtown could just be covered in student high-rises. That important history of Athens being a music cultural mecca would be erased. That kind of culture can't really exist in that kind of high-rise development. You know, it really depends on those older historic structures. You know, so I'm really proud of that aspect. I really believe in protecting these in-town neighborhoods, but I also realize that there's so much room for growth. And in many ways, these in-town neighborhoods with their diverse housing types and their density can be a blueprint for what we can do in other neighborhoods.
Now let's meet challenger Jason Jacobs. Welcome to the show, Jason.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for having me.
First, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? What do you do as a day job, and what's inspiring you to run for commission?
Well, I'm Jason Jacobs. I'm a 40-year-old husband, father of 3 very energetic young boys, and a business owner. My wife opened up Cheeky Peach in 2010. I had come back to graduate from University of Georgia after playing baseball in the Mets organization. What brought me to University of Georgia was playing baseball here as well.
What position did you play?
I was a catcher. I was recruited as a catcher. I played a lot of different positions. I just wanted to hit, so it didn't matter. Wherever you put me, I'd figure it out. But catching was my passion. I liked the strategy of it. And honestly, being a little bit ADD, it kept me involved. And I like being on both sides of the ball. I think catching is a unique position where you bring the pitchers together, but you're part of the pitching group, which usually that's how you practice. You know, the pitchers kind of practice on their own, position players. So you kind of bring the two together. You're always kind of bridging that gap. But I came back to graduate in 2010. I wanted to make a go of coaching, actually. I was always something that I had envisioned. Even my senior year, I didn't think I would get an opportunity to play at the next level. Actually got off to a really good start my first couple of years in the minor leagues and thought maybe I could actually make it to the big leagues. And once you get in it, you realize like, I'm really close. But it didn't work out. I came back to pursue coaching. A new coach came in. They kind of rotate everybody through and we had a decision to make. Like I said, my wife had opened up Cheeky Peach and was running it out of about 900 square feet. And it started to grow and we moved around the corner. We had put roots in town. We always knew we wanted to be here. She opened up her business, started her dream. And as it grew, some of that back-end administrative stuff became, you know, more of a daily task. And I was a math major, so I took on some of those things, the accounting side of things, the projection side of things, setting budgets, doing payroll, you know, all the admin stuff that goes into running a business. And really, I've been doing that ever since 2013. 2014 probably, as things have grown.
Cool. And what inspired your run for commission?
Well, I started getting involved in reaching out to commissioners and mayors probably early on in 2015, and it was surrounding the homeless problem that had kind of been in Athens since I was a student, but it had gotten progressively worse. My wife actually, when she was pregnant, somebody was aggressively panhandling and made her feel very uncomfortable. And as we shared that story with a lot of our young employees, mostly female, who were at university, they had similar stories. And I was like, I have to make the town aware of this. So I went to a couple of roundtables, spoke to the mayor at the time, Nancy Denson. And as things kind of progressed, 2020, obviously a lot of things changed, and you saw an increase in some of those same issues. And I started speaking out to different people in various parts of the government asking for help. There was a lot of deflection. Oh, this is happening everywhere. And I just thought I wanted to focus on things that we could do as a community to make things better. So I thought that me throwing my hat into that and talking about those issues and coming together, because I think if anyone had a magic pill that just solved it all, we'd be doing it right now. I think it takes dialogue and a back and forth, and I've met so many good people in our community. I think we're taking some good steps, but I still think that some of the questions that need to be addressed are being talked around or swept under the rug, or kind of considered as, that's not really a problem. Let's, do this. This will work out if we just do it this way. And I think there needs to be more of an open dialogue.
Okay. And if elected, what would be your top priorities for your first term?
Well, like I said, I got into this with the homeless, and I think that would be a priority. But as I've gone around and canvassed and talked to people and really learned some of the other issues going around, I think one of the major missing pieces is that coming together, speaking with one another, having a good discourse, good constructive discourse, good constructive disagreement. I think that if you get too focused on your position and you don't listen to someone else's position, you may find yourself creating some problems in the process of trying to solve them. I think we need to bounce ideas back and forth off of one another, discuss the pitfalls, scrutinize our own positions, and then come together as a community with all the other commissioners to work together to solve those common problems and make Athens better for everyone.
Back to Melissa. What are your top priorities if reelected?
Well, we have this future land use plan process going on, and that's totally my wheelhouse. I mean, that's what got me sucked into local government, and I feel like my experience on the ground in that planning and zoning realm can really help guide that. It's kind of like this double-edged sword. We want to protect our neighborhoods and our character, but we want to allow for growth. And I believe we can do that. I believe there's plenty of room for increased density in many of our neighborhoods, but I also believe there are neighborhoods that we really need to tamp things down, where they're just getting overrun, particularly with student gentrification, and things are just too crowded, and folks are getting blocked in their driveways. And we really need to carefully choose, where we open things up a little bit and where we tamp things down.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that, as far as, what kinds of growth that you wanted to see. So can you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, well, we talk a lot about ADUs, accessory dwelling units, and I believe that they should be perfectly legal in most of our communities. And we had an ordinance come before us that would have allowed that, but it didn't have any limit on the number of bedrooms, and it didn't have any guidelines for how to manage stormwater, or even how to allow those on lots where you have septic tanks, where you have limited septic capacity. So, I believe in opening it up to an ADU ordinance. The thing that really gave me pause with that ordinance was the fact that I see what's happening in our extremely dense in-town communities, where we already do allow that kind of, multi-unit development, particularly in Rock Springs and East Athens, where you have very small lots, very narrow street frontages. You have many houses don't even have driveways, and it's a mess. I did a ride around with the solid waste hauler last year, and he really opened my eyes to the realities of, just basic infrastructure management in these dense in-town neighborhoods that are now overrun with cars. And in a perfect world, maybe there's a future where people won't have cars. But, we have an immediate issue on the ground now, and we have to acknowledge that. And we have to make sure that the people that have been living and working in these neighborhoods for generations can continue to live peaceable lives.
So about your voting record on housing, you supported a relatively dense, I suppose, cottage court style development on Oglethorpe Avenue, which I thought was pretty great, but some nearby black residents really didn't want that one, but you did vote for it. And then about a year later, you voted down a bigger apartment building on Baxter Street after nearby residents expressed some very similar complaints. Those residents were white. Why did you vote for one of these developments and not the other?
So I think when it comes to density, it's all in the details and design. First of all, the Baxter Street project was huge, multi acres. Was it 7 acres? I can't remember, but it was huge. It was huge. And to allow a complete rezone of that entire project would have effectively put something like on scale of the Mark on Baxter Street, where you do have really limited transportation capacity, and it's also not that close to campus. It was intended for student housing, and you would have seen a definite auto traffic back and forth to campus and to downtown. As far as I support these cottage courts. You take a small amount of land, usually just a couple acres, and you're able to get, a half dozen homes on them, freestanding, owner-occupied homes. And we really, really need that. I mean, that model is what already exists in many of our in-town neighborhoods.
Now let's switch gears and talk about homelessness. So this has always been a problem in Athens, but over the past few years, it's been growing. And I think most people, regardless of their political perspective, would probably agree that it's one of the most pressing issues our city is facing, that and the related issue of affordable housing. So what can we do about it? Do you generally support a housing first style approach to reducing homelessness, or are you more on the treatment first approach?
I'd certainly support a housing first approach. I mean, I don't think you can even begin to fully undergo treatment unless you have a roof over your head. I just think of the everyday stresses of life, even in my, seemingly easy and privileged life, being able to come home to a roof over my head is everything. Like, you can't even begin to just undergo day-to-day mechanisms of dealing with life if you are literally on the streets. Like, how do you manage your finances? How do you manage your health? How do you manage recovery if you don't have a place to lay down at night?
What's your take on the low barrier shelter that I believe it's in the homelessness plan? Mm-hmm. And some people don't really want it because they say that people they need to sober up first.
I mean, how do you sober up on the streets? I just don't get it. Like, let's get people in a safe, supervised environment where they, can gather their thoughts and have some peace and, have direct access to services. Low barrier shelter doesn't mean you just put a bunch of junkies in, one apartment building. It's, these tend to be, the concept is to have services on site, have counselors on site, to really offer people the most easy and convenient and direct access to treatment and support.
Now to Jason on the topic of homelessness. Jacobs recently served on the board of the Athens Homeless Coalition for only a couple months before resigning.
You were on the board of that.
I was.
For a short period of time, then you stepped down. And you said at a recent candidate forum held by a conservative group, Athens-Clarke, that you stepped down because you disagreed with their housing first approach, specifically around the idea of a low barrier shelter.
My question was actually for Jason. I just wanted to ask, what was your reasoning for stepping down from the Athens Homeless Coalition board in the past couple weeks?
My big thing was with the low barrier shelter in that plan. I always kind of had a problem with that. Low barrier meaning no requirement for sobriety and no criminal background checks. And those two things didn't sit right with me.
But studies have shown that Housing First offers greater housing stability, especially for those experiencing chronic homelessness.
Yes.
And because it stabilizes people more quickly, it can reduce costs to homeless providers and the government. So knowing that, does it change your mind, or do you still support a treatment-first style approach instead of a housing-first approach?
I think that there's a combination of both. I don't think that there's just focus on housing first or just focus on treatment. I think you have to combine the two. I'm not against a housing first approach, and I do agree that those studies say that, if you want to get back up on your feet, that, starting with a roof over your head is a really good, way to do that. It's really tough to do that from sleeping, in a tent, outdoors on the streets. There's obviously a lot of speed bumps, that creates, right? And when I looked at the low barrier shelter, I think that was something that I really got to the Homeless Coalition. I applied to be on that board, and I got there thinking that there was a way that we could put some barriers around that, because low barrier kind of meant no barrier, where there was no requirement for sobriety, which I thought put people that were trying to use that facility. I think the shelter, we need a shelter. We mentioned about housing first. You need to have a shelter for people. So when it came to the low barrier shelter, I was concerned about the lack of sobriety, because people that are trying to get sober would then have to be with people that maybe weren't, and that could trigger them, threaten their sobriety on that level. And I also thought that the no criminal background check on the low barrier shelter could be a bit dangerous. Obviously, when you're talking about the homeless community, there are going to be, crimes in someone's past that maybe are small crimes, but some of those bigger violent crimes, I think, need to be addressed and maybe said, hey, we can't have everyone under the same roof doing that because you might be a threat to somebody else. And those two things really kind of ate at me, and I felt disillusioned in that I didn't think I would be able to make a difference in changing that. I thought that it felt as though those decisions were already made, and that was going to be the way that it was going to be.
Breaking news. APN just obtained a copy of the resignation letter Jason sent to the Homeless Coalition. The reason he gave in the letter for stepping down was the Laken Riley murder. Quote, "In light of the recent tragedy of the murder of Laken Riley, I cannot in good conscience be part of any actions that would welcome another such person into our community. One of my biggest fears regarding the strategic plan to reduce and prevent homelessness in Athens has been that it will attract more homeless population from outside of Athens, continuing to grow an unstable population with potential to be dangerous to our community. I don't see this work having any positive effect on Athens." And now back to the interview.
You also said at that forum that you would vote to repeal a 2019 resolution in support of the immigrant community if elected, and that you don't support Athens being a sanctuary city.
I don't believe we should be a sanctuary city, absolutely not.
Will you push for a vote to repeal, rescind, reverse his 2019 resolution and 2019?
Yeah, I don't think that's good for Athens.
Of course, Athens isn't a sanctuary city, but I know what you meant by that. And as far as looking at District 2, I know it's changed quite a bit from the way it used to be. I think there used to be a pretty substantial population of undocumented people in the district, or the old District 3, I mean. And that's changed, but there may still be a few people without documentation living in the district. Mm-hmm. And they would be your constituents if you're elected. Mm-hmm. So knowing that you might want to deport them, what would you say to them to earn their friends, neighbors, or family members' votes?
I don't think I want to deport anyone. I don't think I've ever said that necessarily. I think that anyone coming into our community to enrich it should be welcome to do so. I think we should make it clear that we're going to follow state and federal laws, and I think that was more of my answer to that question, which to me, I didn't like the question in the first place. The man that posed it stood up and said yes or no, and I don't think that is a yes or no question. Having read through it, I wasn't really prepared for that question. That was something that was done 5 years ago, 2019. And I was more interested in talking about what we're going to do going forward. I think it would be a good idea going forward to state as a city that we are going to follow state and federal laws as we are required to do, and just make that clear. I think that's good for everybody. But after that situation, I went and I educated myself. I spoke to some people in the Hispanic community, kind of got their feelings on things. And honestly, I want everyone to feel welcome. I don't want people to feel like they're going to, get a knock on their door and say, you got to leave. I don't think that that's right at all. And I want people to be able to use resources that we have in law enforcement to keep them safe as well, and not feel like they're going to be deported for that. That being said, I do think we should make it clear we're going to follow the state and federal laws when it comes to that. And I think anyone here that's coming to enrich our community is more than welcome.
Okay, so what I'm hearing now is that you do support the 2019 resolution and that you would support Athens being a, quote, sanctuary city?
No, I wouldn't say that.
Okay,
don't.
So
what is, I guess, how do you define a sanctuary city that we're not going to follow protocols that are set upon us to be followed?
Well, I guess what I'm asking is, what about the 2019 resolution did you not like?
I didn't like the impression that it gave that we were a sanctuary city. I think we should be clear that we are going to follow state and federal laws.
So that means deporting people?
I think that means communicating with the agencies that we're required to communicate with when those situations pop up. But I don't think that we should be going and knocking on people's doors and saying, where are your papers either.
So would you want to vote to repeal that resolution?
No, not necessarily. I'd rather move forward. I would be much more in favor of, that's a 5-year-old resolution. I would be much more in favor of having a resolution or something that stated very clearly that we were following state and federal law so that everybody knew that.
Now let's hear Melissa's thoughts.
Do you have any regrets about voting for the 2019 resolution in support of the immigrant community in town?
No, I have no regrets about that. I fully support the basic concept of America as a welcoming place, and our community is a welcoming place. We're a very cosmopolitan town. We have a major university. I think about the grad students that I work with in my department. At least half of them are either foreign exchange student or, first or second generation Americans. When that resolution was presented, it was during a really terrifying time in this nation. Children were being ripped out of their mother's arms at the border and thrown in cages. Families were being torn apart. There was just a mass shooting of Latino people in El Paso, Texas. It was a horrifying, terrifying town, and our Latino community was living in constant fear. And I believe we had a duty to stand up and make that resolution and assure people in our community of all cultures and backgrounds that we support them and we will not tolerate that kind of bigotry in this community.
Okay. So now I want to ask you about some of the more controversial things that you've said over the years. A few years ago, you said UGA football players were out, quote, raping and murdering. And recently, some in the Republican Party have been calling you out for, they've been calling for you to be censured over a statement you made about Laken Riley's murder.
First of all, I want to send all my peace and strength to all who knew and loved Laken Riley. This tragedy has hit me particularly close. I know those trails. A place that holds so many happy memories for me is now forever tainted by violence, and I am as disgusted by the crime as I am by the hysterical glee with which so many have seized upon this tragedy to promote division, bigotry, and hate. This tragedy offers yet another reminder that monsters are real, and they come in all shapes and sizes. With terrifying regularity, they come in the form of white men with weapons of war.
And I think they would want to point out there that Laken Riley's killer was Latino. In that same speech, you also called Donald Trump a, quote, traitorous, insurrectionist, bigoted, lying, cheating, fraudulent, philandering rapist. With everything you've said, do you still think you're someone who can unite this district?
I'm not afraid to speak truth to power, and I believe that people in power should speak truth to power. I believe it's my duty in this really scary times when conspiracy theory and lies and violence are perpetuated on the right consistently. We don't have those voices on the left fighting back. For generations, people on the left have been showing up to a knife fight with a plastic spoon. And in the meantime, the right has upped the ante. And somebody's got to do it. I feel privileged to be in a position where I can do it. I just visited the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, and I saw all the attacks that these folks undertook standing up for the rights of African American people and trying to win basic civil rights. And we are taking massive steps back in recent years. We have got to stand up and speak out. We're at a point where states and municipalities are banning books. Who does that? They're not even allowed to teach about African American history. We have mass violence, easy access to weapons of war. I'm not kidding about that. Somebody's got to speak out. And over again, I hear people saying, you know, shut up, don't say anything about that, you know, calling for civility. But civility is often code for silence, and I can't be silenced. You can't have democracy with silence. I mean, I believe in democracy. I believe that people should be able to speak out and speak their minds and speak for people who can't speak up, because there are plenty of people who are afraid to speak up. You know, Hitler had brown shirts who beat people in the streets. Now we have internet trolls. It's just a substitution. You know, there is a rising movement towards fascism, and that is documented. We see women don't even have control of their bodies in half the states in the Union. So we've got to speak out. We've got to fight. And those of us who are able to, we have a duty to.
So I hear you on about the statements about Donald Trump, definitely. As far as the UGA football players, I think some people felt like you're painting with a really broad brush there.
Well, okay, so first of all, that was taken completely out of context. I feel like there are other recruitment tools that could be used, and I brought this up before. I had a discussion with Chief Spruill about, you know, direct recruiting maybe from UGA athletes. You know, they're highly fit and intelligent, college-educated young people who might want to stay in this community. And we've seen far too many of them go down the wrong path after they leave Athens, so.
I think all the football players got drafted.
Oh no,
we got to draft them back.
No, a lot of them are out there raping and murdering.
I think they're making $1 million going.
Yeah, a couple of them are out there raping and murdering. So
Whoa. Allegedly, Jesus.
So I was proposing at the time that in order to ramp up our ACC police recruitment efforts, maybe we should reach out to some of these football players, because over and over and over again, we were seeing headlines of, you know, these young guys drag racing. There was definitely some sexual assault instances. There were some thefts going on a few years ago. Like every other month, it seems like, you know, some of these guys are getting in trouble. And what's going on that, you know, they're put in this position of real privilege, you know, and why are they ending up in these situations where they end up turning towards crime? What more could be done to steer them away from it? And yes, there's a UGA football player who was recently convicted of murder for a shooting an Oconee County store clerk. There's something going on where these guys are not getting the guidance that you would expect them to get when they're put in such a position. And the drag racing is unacceptable. The street racing is unacceptable. That is endangering an entire community with impunity. I mean, 2 kids died last year due to that behavior. I would love to see more outreach and collaboration with UGA athletes in general. You know, I mean, you'd think that they're physically fit and very disciplined and college educated. They'd be the perfect candidates for public safety careers.
Jason gets the last word on the controversial things Melissa has said.
All right, so now I want to ask you about your opponent, who has been under fire for saying a number of insensitive and controversial things. Mm-hmm. A few years ago, she said that UGA football players were rapists and murderers, and, you know, there is some basis in fact to what she's saying. There were a couple of people there was someone who was convicted of.
Yeah, but to paint with such a broad brush, I think, is extremely.
Exactly, I think people were offended because she was painting with such a broad brush.
It's not just offensive; it's very divisive. I think that you're taking the actions of one person and projecting them onto a whole group of people, and that's not fair to those other people. They had nothing to do with anything that happened in that, and to paint them that way, I've been painted that way, and I don't appreciate it at all. I think that it's, again, very divisive, and another reason why I'm trying to run it, people need to be able to have differences and be able to talk them out and not be shamed for having those differences or be categorized as a monster or, you know, something they are not. I think that those are extremely inflammatory and not constructive. I want to come from it from a constructive point of view where all viewpoints are heard and respected if they're presented in a respectful manner. That's how you go about making change. You don't sit there and yell and shame and be divisive. I see so much of that on the national level, and I think it's invaded here at a local level where you feel like one political side is trying to punch the other political side, and the other political side is trying to punch, you know, that political side back, and the middle is sitting there taking all the blows. And to me, you know, a Attack my ideas, absolutely. Let's have a good conversation and go back and forth and try and find a good common ground that we can agree upon and move forward in those directions. And let's analyze those things very well, see what works, what doesn't work, and put more attention on the things that are working and divert some of the resources that we're allocating to the things that aren't. That's how we move forward. And I think that the language that has come out from my opponent in the past has been more divisive than it has been uniting. And I'd like to see us become more united, because I think that's what Athens is at its core. That's what it's been since I've been here for 22 years. And it really feels like the extremes on both sides are pushing further apart and forgetting about the people in the middle who just want to go to work every day, do what's right by them and their family and the town, and make it a better place to be.
All right, well, thanks so much for doing this interview.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap. For the next round of interviews, the APN members and the denizens of Twitter have both chosen the contested school board race in District 2. I hope to get that one done before early voting starts on April 29th, but it will certainly be ready before Election Day, which is May 21st. Happy voting, everybody.